We begin this news hour in Ukraine, where Russia says it's withdrawing its troops from Kherson city, the only regional capital it has captured since the invasion began. Tonight, Ukraine's military commander-in-chief says he can't confirm or deny the Russian pullout, but he says his forces have made big gains in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the US estimates that around 100,000 Russian and a similar number of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or injured since the war began. Our chief correspondent, John Cookson, has the story.
There's a Kiev-imposed news blackout in the Kherson region, so images on social media are the only evidence we have so far of a Russian withdrawal. Ukrainian forces discovering abandoned Russian checkpoints and military equipment. Ukrainian troops are said to be moving carefully, suspecting they may be being drawn into a Russian trap. And these are allegedly ferries transporting civilians to the right bank of the Dnipro River, away from the Ukrainian advance, taking them to Russian-held territory. The ferry passes a damaged bridge shelled by the Ukrainians. Russia's dramatic announcement of a withdrawal from Kherson city came in a staged TV debate. General Sergei Surovkin saying, Kherson and nearby settlements can't be properly supplied and function. People's lives are constantly in danger. The enemy is firing indiscriminately at the city. Prohibited methods of warfare may be used. The regional administration decided to evacuate the population. What's happened to Kherson city's 400,000 citizens isn't known. The Russians have been evacuating them during the last few weeks. Military experts are suspicious of Russia's motives.
It could be that it's a genuine withdrawal in order to regroup, recover, reinforce, and be prepared to attack at some point in the future in that area. Or otherwise, it could be a ruse to withdraw. Let's face it, we've also heard that most of the civilian population have withdrawn from Kherson. Maybe it's a ruse to encourage the Ukrainians to advance, such that the Russians could launch a counteroffensive with armored forces, and heaven forbid that they could possibly launch an attack with tactical nuclear weapons in the open ground around Kherson.
It's hard to track the whereabouts of evacuated civilians. The Ukrainians fear many may have been transported to Russia already. John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins me now from London for more. Good to see you, John. So Ukrainian forces moving gradually as Russian forces withdraw from Kherson. What's the latest from there?
The latest, Charles, is that we really don't know for sure whether the Russians are withdrawing. Look, the Ukrainians say they don't know either, but the fact is that American spy satellites are giving real-time information and they're scanning constantly the region. So the Americans will be telling the Ukrainians exactly what's happening on the ground, whether the Russians are pulling out of Kherson. These images showing now, fresh into the Arise News Center, showing Ukrainian soldiers heading towards Kherson city there, and they're being greeted by jubilant crowds of people there who've been under the yoke of a Russian occupation for so long, and getting quite rightly cheered by the people there as they progress. The Ukrainian forces are about 20 kilometers or so from Kherson city itself. They're very cautious. They believe it could be a trap. The city may be mined. There may be booby traps. There may be even Russian special forces ready to ambush them in the city. We just don't know. And until the Ukrainian flag flies from the roof of City Hall in Kherson, will we know that the Russians have finally left. If they have left, they've regrouped on the right bank of the Kherson of the Dnipro River. We can see a map showing the direction in which they will be traveling away from the north bank of the Dnipro across to the south. The area etched in pink is the area that the Russians are allegedly tonight leaving to go to the greater ordinary pink area on the south bank of the river, and there they will dig in. So that's the situation tonight. My understanding is it will take probably until Saturday or Sunday, Charles, before the Ukrainians actually move into Kherson city itself. Charles.
And John, that top US General Mark Milley saying that well over 100,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded since the start of the invasion, with Ukraine's forces probably sustaining a similar number of casualties, and 40,000 Ukrainian civilians estimated to have been killed, 15 to 30 million refugees. I mean, this is clearly a massive cost and a massively destructive war.
A sharp reminder of how cruel this war is, and those figures from the Pentagon are a sharp increase to the figures given before by the same sources. That in the past they've said around 70,000 Russian forces and 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed so far. So that's a sharp increase. When I was there reporting for Arise in March, I mean the killing had already started, and I attended church and filmed a church and reported from a church in Ukraine where they were burying soldiers and holding services for four at a time, Charles, through the day. So many Ukrainian servicemen killed in this terrible conflict, and of course the Russians are paying the price too. Conscripts, many of them in the Russian army, and regular soldiers, and both sides, as I say, paying a terrible human price. And of course the families will have to live with this for the rest of their lives. Charles.
And John, crucially, one of the key points that General Milley made is that if there is an opportunity to negotiate to end this terrible human suffering that you described there, then both sides should take that opportunity. But is anyone listening?
Well, they may be, Charles, and we've discussed this already earlier this week when it was announced officially the Washington has been talking to Moscow via back channels, and only today Tayyip Erdogan, who is a key ally of President Putin, he's the president of Turkey, of course, talked about this withdrawal from Kherson city and said it was a very important and a positive step and will help in mediation. Now, what Erdogan is talking about there is some kind of ceasefire. And I suspect somewhere in the background there are these talks ongoing all the time. And I did speculate earlier this week that once the Ukrainians had taken Kherson city and established themselves there, then there might be a window of opportunity to talk about negotiations to end this conflict, because the Russian leadership in the form of Putin is under a lot of pressure from his cronies and some military sources in Moscow. And so too Zelensky under huge pressure, I think, from the Americans now, who and countries in the West who are suffering, especially as a result of sky-high gas prices as a result of this conflict and the winter coming, that the winter might offer some kind of opportunity for meaningful negotiations to try to settle this conflict somehow. But Zelensky is still playing hardball, saying that he wants the Russians out of Crimea and the 4 annexed provinces. And he also said that any agreement would have to be agreed in a ballot with the Ukrainian people, which of course is another big ask. But the winter and the slowing down of this conflict may give the opportunity that people are looking for.
John, thanks very much indeed. John Cookson, Arise chief correspondent, talking to me there about developments around Ukraine.